because the brand names are very recognizable for the consumer. Everyone knows what Mr. Clean stands for. And therefore that value that sits in that equity, how can we transpose that from just the consumable side to also the service side, for instance?
Excellent. Chris, I appreciate your time with me today. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
We're good?
That was great, guys.
Thank you. Fascinating stuff.
It is.
Yeah.
It's
I bet you love going to work every day. Yes.
not only every day, the evenings as well. Because as you said,
24/7 job when you're a global business.
Yeah, essentially we've got people working around.
How do I pronounce your last name?
Jonas.
So first name Jonas.
Yes. Prising. P-R-I-S-I-N-G.
Jonas Prising. Prising. Manpower President of the Americas, correct? Good.
All right, whenever you're ready.
All right. Hi, Dustin Klein with Smart Business Magazine. I am here with Jonas Prising, Manpower President of the Americas. Jonas, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. You know, heard a lot about the changing workforce with millennials, with Generation Y, and all of the different changes that have been happening with regard to attitudes and expectations and goals. Can you talk a little bit about this changing workforce and how we as executives can change our mindset to better manage them?
So we have a pretty unique situation in today's workforce because we actually have 4 generations in the workplace all at the same time. Now, if you look at the 2 extremes, you have baby boomers and their children working at the same time, which essentially, so as you know, the baby boomer generation is the biggest portion of the workforce today. Their children, however, are about to overtake them. So very soon, the millennials, those that are born sometime between 75 and 1980, 85, are going to be taking over and be the biggest part of the workforce. And that has some challenges in terms of how the workforce gets managed within companies, because their expectation and value sets are very, very different. On the one extreme, many in the older generation have an attitude around work to live, make sure that you contribute, a much higher tendency to stay engaged and be more loyal to the company where they work. The expectations going into a new opportunity or a job from a millennial perspective is that the average time that they will spend there is maybe less than 2 years. Their expectations in terms of coming into a company or coming into their own careers is that they will change jobs maybe 15 to 20 times. So within that, of course, you now have an interesting tension between those generations and the ones in between that create for some challenges for leadership as they try to communicate and work with these different generations that have quite different characteristics. So being aware of the differences is already a very good start, and then to the best of a company's ability, accommodate the various desires of that generation is of course going to help them be more engaged and stay engaged over as long a period of time as possible, and in the case of millennials, make them stay more than the 2 years that they expect to stay.
What are some of the traits that define those different generations? You mentioned living to work.
And we have had a panel debate earlier today, which has been quite interesting, and we looked at, and somebody explained that there is live to work in the earlier generation, work to live, which is probably the baby boomer generation, and then the millennials generally just want to live. And what that implies is that their mission is just to, and the traits that they have is really around their own development. They manage their own skills. They have preferences in what they want to do, both from a professional perspective as well as from a life perspective. And it's really mostly about what they want to do and the companies that they choose to work for fitting in with that desire, which is very different from the older generation.
How do you engage that workforce to kind of meet those needs, leadership development, training, things like that?
Well, I think that most of them would be better managed through objectives rather than tasks. So you don't tell them what you want them to do, you tell them what you're trying to achieve and let them get on with it. you probably want to think about letting them use time and technology the way they think is the most productive. So if it is for them more productive to work in the late morning up until late night because they have other things going on in the morning, and all you measure is the output of their work, that is a way of motivating them. They do require and would like to get encouragement and praise on a frequent basis. We all do, but this seems to be a trait that is more pronounced in that generation.
What about social responsibility? I've heard a lot of the wanting to give back, to be good to the planet, things like that.
So I think most of that generation choose companies to work for that somehow fit within their professional desires in terms of career opportunities, but also what the company stands for in terms of values, environmental awareness, so corporate social responsibility. And that is being clearly a driver in the choices, and something that the younger generations are much, much more interested in today when they make their choices about where they want to work.
Interesting. You mentioned technology earlier as a player that's allowing them to decide when they want to work. Do you think the concept of the 40-hour work week has really gone out the window because of that? Or do you think that they're working within the same kind of framework of a 40-hour work week, and the expectation levels of when that 40 hours comes into play is different?
It's a hard question to answer. I think, looking at how people work, though, my guess would be that they're actually working much more than 40 hours. They just choose to work at times when it fits them. And I think one of the studies or many studies have shown that the productivity of workers that work from home or remote or virtually engaged is actually very, very high. Most people want to work and they want to contribute, and if they can do so without having to commute for 2 hours or an hour and a half, you're just getting them to be so much more productive. And we're seeing business models emerge that are essentially based around a virtual workforce connected through technology, which has all kinds of interesting implications from a leadership perspective, but of course also from a P&L perspective, because you don't need the physical infrastructure. You do need, however, supervision of the remote workforce without having physical infrastructure anywhere near them. So that it actually poses some different challenges in terms of leadership. But my guess would be that technology, the 40-hour work week as a framework is becoming much, much more fluid. And technology probably, from a company perspective, as well as from an individual perspective, gives them more time to work because they just have more time available. They can fit it in when it works.
Sure. You mentioned challenges for leadership for managing that type of workforce. What tips would you give to somebody who has decided they're going to take advantage of letting their workers work from home or work at a coffee shop or wherever they're going to be, but yet need to understand how to change their own expectations internally to manage people to meet the goals they've already set?
I think that when you have a situation where you manage a remote workforce, how you communicate and what you communicate becomes so much more important. There's no longer a question of having an all-hands meeting and getting everybody in a room and telling them this is what we do and this is how we do it, or walking down a corridor to coach somebody. You now have to communicate and lead and manage in a different way, which probably means you have to communicate much, much more frequently and be a very good communicator. Understand that your employees need to know about things. They need to understand them so that they can believe in them, and finally so they act upon that belief. It's easier to convey in person, and you have to be much, much more acutely aware of the difficulties in doing that with your remote workforce because they're far away and they may not see anybody for a long time.
Sure. Give me an example of how technology has changed the way that Manpower does business.
So in our world, we of course meet many millions of people all over the world. We probably meet around 14 million people that look for work through all of our 4,500 offices globally. Most of those interactions in the past were in person through our physical infrastructure, our branches that we had in all locations. Today, a good part of the people we only meet virtually. We meet them over the internet. And we have seen an explosion of people presenting themselves over the internet and using that really as their only method of communicating with us, up to the point when we actually have to verify the skills, at which point, for the most part, you have to do a visual or a real verification. You have to sit down and understand the soft skills, and in some cases also the hard skills. But the way we transact our business today, in some parts of our businesses, is almost 90% virtual, which is very, very different from the way it used to be.
How did that change how you look at running the business?
Well, most of our business has historically grown by increasing physical footprint. So we would increase our physical branch infrastructure whenever we went into a country or a geography or a region